Hi, everybody. Today's Thursday, March 5th, 2026, and our dear friend, our brother Alex Krainer is here with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you for the invite, Nima. Always good to join you, and warm greetings to everyone out there.
Let me start, Alex, with the attack, US-Israeli attack on Iran. The main objective, it seems that in the initial hours, or for at least they were talking of in 2 days, they're going to put an end, they're going to strike Iran, they're going to achieve something in 2 days. That was the regime change in Iran, which started with the assassination of the supreme leader of Iran, together with, we've seen later on, we've seen that they have assassinated schoolgirls and some other places as well. But it was the main goal, the main target was the supreme leader of Iran together with his commanders. And then Iran started to come back, started to targeting, to attack, to fire back. It was all in the Persian Gulf together with Israel. Iran started with the US bases in the Middle East. And the escalation, we are in a process of escalation from what we're witnessing. I would say today, as of today, the war is between Iran and NATO together with Israel. Go ahead, your understanding of that.
To my mind, a very tragic turn of events. I think that even as recently as the last time we spoke, I was convinced that there would be no war, that the United States wouldn't attack. And one of the reasons why I was convinced is because the whole thing is so stupid, so off the charts, idiotic, that I thought nobody could possibly be that dumb. They just won't do it. Why? Because I think that Iran has so many advantages over the United States that any chance of victory for the United States is almost zero. The United States is in its own country. They're at home. They don't have problems.
You mean Iran? You mean Iran?
Yeah, Iran. What did I say?
Yeah, you see the United States. Yeah. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Iran is, they're at home. They're on their home base. They've been preparing for this for more than 20 years. They knew that this attack was coming. They may have certain weaknesses, but they have resilience, control over their logistical chain of command. They don't have to hold supplies thousands, tens of thousands of kilometers away. They don't have shortage of missiles. They don't have a shortage of drones, bombs, whatever they need. And they can wage a long war of attrition. The United States cannot wage a long war of attrition. This is costing them tremendously. They're effectively disarming themselves. They're obliged to draw down on stockpiles from other places. They were obliged to stop all aid to Ukraine. So basically, there are there are great weaknesses and fragility to the whole setup of the United States. Even back in the early 1990s, the Pentagon brass was very aware of this weakness. And they published a document, which I forget now what the title of the document was, but I think it was published in 1991, and maybe it was more than one document. But basically what they were saying is that the United States hegemony in West Asia depended on two main factors. One of them is their alliances, i.e. Israel primarily, but then also allies like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and so forth, whom they could always kind of coerce to go into war on their behalf. And the second was power projection, meaning we don't really have the power, we project power so that anybody who would step out of line would be intimidated. We just bring these carrier strike groups, we start dropping bombs, and whoever we target, we bludgeon them into submission. But the warning was that this could all change, because the power projection was there, but the real power wasn't, and then the alliances could become torn up in the future. This situation didn't change. It only got more in favor of the axis of resistance. And then we have to remember that Donald Trump already brought the U.S. power like nobody's ever seen before against Yemen about a year ago in March of 2025, and started bombing, and couldn't accomplish anything. And in the end, they had to kind of ask Ansar Allah for a truce. And then we have to also remember that a much bigger power came to bear on Afghanistan. That didn't go well either. And neither Yemen nor Afghanistan are Iran. Iran is a much bigger, much stronger, much better prepared enemy. Prepared to take the pain and to wage the war for the long haul if necessary. And I think that Iranian leadership, if I understand well, and I have to be a bit careful about that, because there's so much psyops, it's hard to know what's real, what's psyops, what to believe and what not to believe. But it seems to me that the Iranian leadership has now taken a firm stance: no more negotiations, and the war goes on until the complete destruction of the state of Israel. At the same time, the way Trump went about this was tragic, in the sense that the United States cannot extricate itself. Up until days ago, it seemed that he was trying to avoid getting enmeshed in this war. And I thought, the last few days before last Saturday, 28 February, you realized something was going to happen. But I thought maybe there's going to be a little bit of token warfare, and then maybe Trump would just leave it between Iran and Israel. But they are now so deep in. I think that the targeting of a school for girls and killing 170 little girls, killing 20 female volleyball players, and killing Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei were absolutely catastrophic blunders, which now means that Trump owns this completely. There's no, even with the assassination of General Soleimani, it was a mistake that you can overcome. You can still work the diplomacy and patch up and reestablish, let's say, a relationship of cooperation with Iran. After this, it's going to be next to impossible. To my mind, the reason why this is tragic, not just for Iran, but for everybody, for humanity, is because it was very short time ago in January that Trump and his delegation came to Davos, and they made a very categorical, clear, explicit declaration that globalization is failing. We are done with this. We want to embrace a different model. We want to embrace multipolar integrations. We want to embrace domestic development and, the American Hamiltonian system of political economy. And then they went to the Munich Security Conference after that, and they reiterated that same message. And this, to my mind, is the most important decision of all, the most important declaration of war against the globalists. And if you take that direction, then the logical partnerships that you have to cultivate would be with China, with Russia, but also with Iran, which is the dominant regional power in West Asia. What happened between the Munich Security Conference and 28 February? I cannot even understand. I just simply do not understand. But the fact that Trump pulled the trigger means that he owns this. And now from one day to the next, he found himself in an alliance, which, you may say it's overt or it's covert, whatever, but effectively he found himself in alliance with Great Britain, France, Germany, Israel, Al-Qaeda. The American people never asked for this. The American people explicitly voted against this. They were asking for something else, and Trump promised something else. And now he's up to his eyeballs in a war of which he lost control on day one. And I have to add this because this perplexes me extremely. In one of his last press conferences or statement for the public, he was asked, well, now that we killed Ali Khamenei, who would you want to replace him with? And then he said, well, most of the people we were looking to as his replacements are now dead. And then we thought of some others, but they're dead too. And pretty much everybody's going to be dead, and we're not going to know anybody there. Does that sound like a statement of a person who's in control of what's going on? You mean you were talking to people that you wanted to be your Delcy Rodriguez, right? You wanted them to take over, but they ended up dead. I don't know how to explain this, Nima, but it seems to me like either this war is a great deception or everything that came before it was a great deception, or Trump completely lost control of his administration, or if not of his administration, of his military machinery. And if that is the case, then who's in charge? Is it Benjamin Netanyahu? It's a very, very, very troubling development.
Yeah. Alex, one of the main points right now in this war is the Strait of Hormuz. We know that Iran has decided to close the Strait of Hormuz, and right now we don't see that much of tankers going through this strait. How is that going to influence the whole concept of war against Iran? Because this, as you mentioned, as we see from the Iranian officials, this is a long war, a war of attrition. It's not going to be a 2 week, 3 weeks. It's going to be much more than that. And how do you see the case of the Strait of Hormuz? I would argue that the Bab al-Mandab in the Red Sea would be in the same situation soon. And how is that going to influence all of these countries who are, dependent on these two important, pathways?
Well, about a fifth of crude oil flows from the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world through the gates of Hormuz. About a fifth of natural gas supply of the planet comes from Qatar, which is completely shut down now. And I think that European trade, about 90% of all trade that goes through the Red Sea goes to Europe. So that gets cut off. The consequences could be cataclysmic. It's not just that. It's also that a lot of these Gulf states, they have grown far beyond what their natural environment can support, and they became completely dependent on imports for food. So you might actually have food shortages in places like UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Yemen, and so forth. Maybe less Yemen, but all of these Western-oriented Emirates are in a colossal world of trouble. Iran has certain problems as well as water supplies, and now we see that the Americans and Israeli are targeting water infrastructure. So it's going to be extremely difficult for the people in this region. Which again, like all of these things were easy to predict. They were obvious. If you're in charge of the presidential administration in one of the most powerful countries in the world, you have 17 intelligence agencies. You have 20 plus military bases on the ground, CIA stations, embassies, and so forth. How could you possibly not have known this? How could you possibly not have understood the risks that you were taking? For what? I have to ask myself, what was the point? Even if they succeeded to pull off Venezuela, we take out the leader that we don't like. We have him replaced with the leader that we do like. And what did you gain exactly? So it was a gamble, but it's a gamble that's going to end up costing the people in the region the most dearly, in lost life, in destroyed economies. But it's also going to cost everybody else because, already European energy prices have skyrocketed. I think that on Friday, no, on Sunday, so what are we talking? 4 days ago, I went to the gas station. I think I paid for the tank of gas, diesel, €1.75. Now it's already more than €2. And, Europe is supposed to be this great prosperous place of the golden billion, part of the golden billion in the world. But most of the ordinary people are suffering. They have difficulty making ends meet. According to Eurostat, more than 35% of all European households have difficulty making ends meet. And in some countries, it's much, much higher than that. It's like 2/3 of the households. And now you increase their gas prices by almost 20%, and they're not done going up. They're going to go up much higher. Remember, it was 2021 or 22 that oil price was already hit over $120 a barrel. We are at about 83, 84 now. It only just started. So the economic consequences are going to be disastrous. Fortunately, fortunately for Iran, but unfortunately for the European economies, Vladimir Putin came out yesterday and said, maybe we should just completely stop supplying natural gas to our European customers. They've sanctioned us. They said that they would completely stop importing energy from Russia in 2027 anyway. So, why not start straight away cultivating trade with other customers, of which Russia has plenty. So, US LNG imports are extremely expensive, and they're going to get a whole lot more expensive now. Qatar, the supplies broke down. Ukraine has been attacking gas supplies through Ukraine to, Eastern Europe. And so Europe is finding itself in like a perfect storm of energy predicaments that came on top of them, doing away with coal-fired plants, with nuclear plants, and so forth. I don't know where this goes, Nima, but it seems to me that we are being led by absolute fools, and that the unraveling of Europe is going to be something like Weimar Germany in 1922, 1923, which means this could be the kind of economic crisis that could cost tens of millions of lives. Great Britain, 40% of British households depend on natural gas from Qatar. They already have difficulty keeping their houses warm. And now 40% is taken off the market. This is cataclysmic. I don't even know how to quantify it, Nima, but it seems to me that we're going into some extent of a humanitarian disaster for the privileged Europeans.
Alex, I think one of the key points right now, as the escalation is going on, would be the case of water, as you mentioned. Iran doesn't use desalination, but we know that all these Arab states, together with Israel, they use desalination systems, and that could be a huge fragility on their part, because if Iran starts attacking, for example, these desalinations equipment, that could bring a lot of suffering to the people. And if they and that, how do you see the escalation that could somehow get to a level that we may say that the catastrophe is happening in the Middle East?
Nima, it's even worse than that, because I think that Iranians struck a large desalination plant in Israel on day one. I don't think that they will. It's not in their interest to strike desalination plants in other Arab countries, in Arab countries, sorry. But Israel has an incentive to strike desalination plants in Arab countries, false flags to blame Iran and to rally everybody into an alliance, a coalition, to gang up and go to war against Iran. So knowing how completely unscrupulous and fanatical the leadership in Jerusalem is, in Tel Aviv, I think this is coming. I think they will probably do this. And so I have to say, I'm almost a little bit heartbroken that Trump did this. He didn't have to do it, but he did it. And I don't know how it came about. But however it came about, he owns it now. And that may be the fatal blunder for everything else he's been trying to accomplish.
Yeah. But Alex, you see today's Israel. Do you think that Netanyahu was that much powerful to put a lot of pressure on Donald Trump? I see these donor class, people in the United States being the main source of this problem, like Adelson, the family. They have started. Rubio, the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State, he was, the candidate for the, that was somehow picked up by the Adelson family. They put him in the Trump administration. And Donald Trump himself, you don't see Donald Trump. Even J.D. Vance, I don't recognize J.D. Vance anymore. These people have changed. It seems that they somehow, something drastically happened in their mind. I don't know what was that and what is happening in their mind, because look at yesterday, Pete Hegseth came out saying, we are winning, we are doing this. And how can we explain that?
Unfortunately, I listened to Pete Hegseth's speech, and it's just simply appalling. It's primitive barbarism basically what it amounts to. There's no statesmanship in that. There's no responsibility for your words. It's just completely appalling. I don't even understand. I don't know what happened, Nima, but something did happen. It's not about Trump. It's about the system, because the empirical fact is that between 1946 and today, the United States has initiated more than 80% of all wars fought around the world. And I think the count of those wars is more than 240. Okay, 80% of those wars were initiated by the United States. So, you can ask yourself, why is that? Why is that one country in the world started 80% of all the wars in the world? And you would have to think that the American people are extremely belligerent, that they want war, but this is exactly the opposite. The American people always vote for candidates that promise them no more wars. We're not gonna, even George W. Bush promised a humble foreign policy, no more nation building, things like that. And then boom, 9/11 attack happens and everything changes. And so the fact that, Trump, was he deceiving the public when he said no more wars? I promise you we will not go to war. I'm not inclined to think that. I think that when he was promising no wars, he was being sincere. But it seems that the system is so powerful and so entrenched and so ruthless that it doesn't matter what you want. This system, we had in the Epstein files, we had this exchange between Epstein and I forget who exactly, but they were saying like, not those exact words, but basically what they were saying, like, if we get Trump cornered like a rat, he's going to go and attack Iran for us. And we remember also that, John F. Kennedy was pressured to go to war against Vietnam. He resisted, but he ended up dead. And so every president comes in promising no more war. People vote for them because they don't want war. But in the end, they get the wars every time practically without interruption. So it's the system that's kind of hardwired to mobilize the military muscle of the nation for war. Where it comes from is more complicated to understand, but obviously donors have a lot to do with it. But I also believe strongly that the banking establishment has to do with it, because they are the only ones ultimately that benefit from wars no matter what happens, because they fund the both sides usually, and then when the wars are over, they take over the natural resource wealth of the countries that they take over, and that natural wealth immediately becomes profit generating assets on the balance sheets of these banks, which means that they convert other nations' natural resource wealth and labor into their own wealth, like that, by a book entry. It's just that the military has to do the fighting to eliminate the political opposition and install pliable vassal governments everywhere. So unfortunately, this is how the big machine works. I have to say I was very, very hopeful that Trump administration would mark a course correction in this politics, that he would develop good relations with Russia and China, and that with these forces united, they would be able to take on the empire and defeat it finally. And it looked that way. especially last summer in Alaska. And it even looked that way in Davos this January and in Munich Security Council. And then 6 days ago, it changed completely. And now even, because sometimes I'm not sure what we should believe and what's psyops. But I also pay attention to the statements by senior Russian officials. And you can see that this is different. This is, in before they issued mild disapproval of Trump's policy moves, but not really very strong statements. Now they're saying we will do everything that we can to defend Iran and to disable US-Israeli aggression. And this was Sergei Lavrov. This wasn't just, some fringe official. This was Sergei Lavrov, who wouldn't even say anything like this if he didn't run it by President Putin. So that means that Spirit of Alaska is finished. It's over, probably irreversibly. And that the two superpowers in this world are now on a collision course, potentially.
Alex, one of the main questions right now in the United States is why did this war start in the first place? And they were asking this, they were trying to ask, Marco Rubio, Donald Trump himself, J.D. Vance, and because what is happening, the reality of war is that so far the United States they said that they have 6 soldiers killed. But it seems that you look at what for example, the head of national security of Iran, National Security Council, said it's 500. The gap is just mind-blowing between the two. And then you see the Turkish coming out and saying it's something between 100 and 200 casualties on the part of the United States being killed. And you see that there is a huge gap. I would say I would go with the Turkish one. Let's go in the middle. But here comes the main question. Why did this war started? You say that we are confused with Donald Trump's attitude, with what he's saying, but even you don't see that sort of certainty in what Marco Rubio is talking about in terms of what was the main reason of this war. Here is what Marco Rubio said.
Going to be an Israeli action. We knew that would precipitate an attack against American forces, and we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Yesterday, you told us that Israel was going to strike Iran, and that's why we needed to get involved. Today, the president said that Iran was going to get.
Yeah, your statement is false. So that's not what I was asked very specifically. Were you there yesterday?
Yes, I asked
okay.
a question.
No, were you the one that? Because somebody asked me a question yesterday. Did we go in because of Israel? And I said, you were asking me that. You that follow up, and I said no. I told you this had to happen anyway. The president made a decision, and the decision he made was that Iran was not going to be allowed to hide behind its ballistic missile program. That Iran was not going to be allowed to hide behind its ability to conduct these attacks. That decision had been made. The president systematically made a decision to systematically destroy this terroristic capability that they had, and we carried that out. I was very clear in that answer.
Yeah, he's just changing his argument. He said that Israel was going to attack Iran. That's why we started the attack, to preempt, Iran from attacking Israel or all of that. And then he said, no, Iran was, the decision was made in Washington that we are going to attack. It's not for Israel. It's not for Israel. It's the United States has decided to attack Iran.
Yeah, it seems that their justification is changing day by day, and depending on who you ask, if you listen to Trump, it's one thing, and then same day if you listen to Rubio, it's another thing. Then Hegseth says something else completely. It's Armageddon. It's a crusade. It's a preemptive attack because if if you suspect that somebody's going to kill you, of course, you just kill them first. That's the, do unto other before they do unto you. I think that's our values, it seems, in the empire of lies. Then it's the nuclear program, then is the ballistic missile program. The list of justification doesn't end, and depending on whatever suits them on a given day, to the extent that they coordinated their stories, they say one thing, then they change their minds, and then they say something else. Obviously, somehow the administration got coerced into making this move, and I think that they got coerced on the basis of a lie that it was going to be quick and successful, that we behead the state, we launch a decapitation attack, people rise up, take over, we install Delcy Rodriguez, somebody who's going to cooperate with us, and we declare victory, and yay, I win the midterms. But the whole thing was a lie. Obviously, Iran is not Venezuela, Iran is not Yemen, Iran is not Syria, it's not Afghanistan. Iran is, for millennia, is and has been the graveyard of empires. You have to know what you're getting into. And then, a lot of these things, Nima, were so well known and understood in advance. We talked about the supply problems of the region that depend on imports, but also the fact that Iran has hundreds of thousands of drones and missiles that are available to them, that they can, I think I heard a Western expert say that they can create practically a permanent conveyor belt of drones and missiles aimed at Israel, and that can run continuously for 2 years uninterrupted. That's what you're dealing with. And it's, it's not in one place that you can blow up the warehouse and you disarm Iran. It's distributed all over the country, and that country is the size of Europe. It's not, it's not Israel. And you already know that you have difficulty supplying your ships, that the morale of your troops is low, that you have self-sabotage acts, where the troops just sabotage the equipment because they don't want to wage war. It's incomprehensible that they went ahead with this. I hope that one day we will know why and how and who was behind it. I don't think that Trump wanted to do this, really. I think somehow he got maneuvered into it. How and why, I cannot even begin to imagine. But ultimately, it doesn't matter either. He's the commander-in-chief. That's where the buck stops. He owns this one now. And I think that it's going to not only ruin his presidency, it's going to tarnish his legacy forever.
They started, Alex, this is not the first time. They started the war in Ukraine. Then with the whole NATO, all the forces together, it seems that we are getting to the same point, the whole NATO, because it was Russians. When you hear Russians are talking about that, NATO right now has started attacking Iran. It's not, we've learned before coming to this podcast, before coming to live, we've learned that the France, they have deployed, a multi-domain force in the Middle East. Their air defense system is serving for the United States together with the Spanish. The Spanish government was saying so far that we are doing this, we're doing that. They're sending, their air defense systems to Cyprus together with the French. And the United States is using the French bases right now because all these bases, the US bases in the Middle East, were destroyed. And they have nothing else, to use. That's why they have to use the French bases. And I see that the war is in a process of escalation, the way that I don't know how much how much of change can these Europeans bring to the whole concept of war, and how capable are they to defend, for example, Cyprus or Israel, because they've been involved in Ukraine. This is not something fresh, something that they are all prepared for that. And how do you see that? How do you see Europeans getting more involved in the conflict?
I think the Europeans have no choice, in the sense that they need to kind of go along with the US, NATO, Israel agenda, and that this gives them an opportunity to bring daddy back from the cold. Now we're all together. Now we're a big happy family once more. And they all have assets. They all have armaments and arsenals that can blow things up, that can be launched at targets and so forth. But they brought bigger forces to bear down on Iraq 20 some years ago, 23 years ago, almost exactly. They blew up a lot of things. They took over the government. They installed a puppet regime. Nothing happened. They still don't control Iraq, and they're only there by force, hidden behind the high walls of their military bases. Iraqi government already multiple times have requested foreign troops to leave their country, which means that they're unwelcome there, which means that they're going to be targeted for sure. But the problem with all this, you might have weapons to shoot at things and blow things up, but your populations are dead against this war. You don't have a mandate, so you're inviting a revolution at home. So there's going to be social uprisings over there over this in Europe. And so I think the whole thing is altogether a tragedy. I think that Trump had a great opportunity and a huge popular mandate to change things. He failed. Now it's not even a question of whether he made a mistake. Now he failed, and he's even made himself impeachable. And if he loses the midterms, he will be impeached, and this won't be one of those long shot, toothless impeachments. This one will be a slam dunk. He's done. And Europeans, it doesn't change much. They have decided to go to the graveyard of empires, and I think that they will be defeated.
Alex, do you see the possibility of escalation in which that Russia would somehow, because so far the Russians are talking about the Iran didn't ask us for anything so far. They didn't ask any sort of help so far. And how do you see Russia and China as war goes on?
Well, I think that Russia wholeheartedly supports Iran, its current government, and doesn't want a regime change. I'm certain about this. And I think that there's a very strong friendly partnership between the two countries, which has even been enshrined in a treaty. But there are two problems, to the extent that Iranian regime might fall. If you provide them your most advanced weaponry, you need to send troops with it. And one of the important functions of those troops would be to destroy all of it if the government in Tehran falls. Because if you don't, all those systems will fall into the hands of your enemies. So that's one problem. The second problem is that Russia already has its hands full in Ukraine, and that's a war which itself could expand, because as the final defeat of Ukraine is coming closer and closer, the Europeans are increasingly desperate to escalate. So Russians had to call up, they had to expand their the size of their military to 2.5 million. They had to call up additional troops, and about 1.5 million of those are combat troops. That's about double the size of what they have in Ukraine, which means that the Russians see high risk of this war expanding and escalating to a general war between Russia and Western Europe. Of course, the Russians may be doing this out of an abundance of caution. You know, you prepare for something that you hope never happens. But at the same time, that means that they will be very, very careful not to be overstretched by committing too much to Iran. And Iranians themselves probably want to defend their independence, meaning if you prevail in the war thanks to an outside partner, then that outside partner might expect certain concessions and favor after the war is over. And Iran might want to defend their independence and say, no, we will run our country the way we see fit. We will make partnerships, alliances, deals with who we want on whatever basis we want. So thank you very much, but we will do our best to defend ourselves alone. And I think that Iran is strong enough. I as far as I can tell, the great weakness is air defense, because it seems to me that Iran is really receiving the blows from the Israelis and the Americans by from aircraft that they should be able to shoot down, but for some reason they seem to be shooting very few of those aircraft down.
Yeah. I think, Alex, when it comes to Iran and how they see the war, they had the war in 80s against Iraq, and they know the nature of the war and how the escalation. In those days, all European, together with the United States, together with Soviet Union, somehow China, they were all supporting Iraq in the war against Iran. Iran is not in the same position. I think the main question right now, Alex, is how capable the United States. Let's assume that they would be able to target whatever they want in Iran with the fighter jets. So what is the objective? What is the end game? And what are they going to achieve? And what are they achieving by using these fighter jets in Iran? I say they're not achieving. They cannot achieve victory over Iran, because that's why they're asking the Kurdish terrorist group to get in. 10,000 sold to 10,000 Kurdish terrorist group come in, and somehow the ground forces in Iran, and more than, I would argue, combination of the army together with IRGC and all of these different factions, and more than 2 million, soldiers ground soldiers
on their own terrain.
Yeah, exactly. There is no possibility for these Kurdish people. They're gonna be meat grinder for them. They're gonna be slaughtered, and that's the problem on the part of the United States, in my opinion, because by this air campaign they cannot achieve victory, and Iran, as time goes by, they're gonna hit harder Israel. They have the means to attack Israel, but the sustainability of the war right now is the question, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So apparently, and there's a University of Chicago professor that apparently devoted his career to researching exactly these issues, the military campaigns for regime change. Apparently, according to himself, he's planned some of regime change campaigns in the past, including selecting targets for all this. And he has said that in 100-year history that he has analyzed, not a single one regime change succeeded without troops on the ground. That is, with air attacks only. And so the fact that they launched this without preparing ground troops for invasion of Iran tells me that this really was a gamble. We bomb, and then, with any luck, Iranian regime falls. And now, when they realize that the regime didn't fall, they realized, okay, now to succeed, we need ground troops. They started scrambling the Kurds and the Azeris, and, they're basically twisting their arms to force them, to coerce them to go fight their wars. But it seems that the Kurds are very unwilling, and Azerbaijan is very weak, because Azerbaijan economically depends on Iran and on Russia, because Azerbaijan basically has two exports: oil and gas and agricultural produce. And I think that 80 or 90% of their agricultural produce goes to Russia. And so a few months ago, when Azerbaijan started antagonizing Russia and Iran, the Russians basically said, okay, guess what? Your pipeline that goes over Russian territory, we shut that down. And we're closing our markets to your agricultural produce. And then Aliyev had to go back to Putin and say, like, please don't, I'm going to be nice from now on. And they fixed the situation, but it was very easy for Putin to bring Azerbaijan to heel. And so the fact that now American and Israelis are trying to push Azerbaijan into going into Iran to carve off, northwest Azerbaijan from Iran is another sign of weakness, because I think it's very, very highly unlikely to succeed. If they manage to mobilize Kurds, they're going to have a massive problem on their hands with Turkey. That's going to, Turkey, the second largest military in NATO, is suddenly going to become an enemy. I mean, this is such a can of worms, Nima, for all of these reasons that we're discussing. And all of this was perfectly clear before 28 February. I was convinced nobody is this stupid. They will not attack Iran. There's just too many things that can go wrong and will go wrong. So it just can't be. They won't do it. But they did it. And I think that this attempt to mobilize a ground invasion by proxy forces who are unwilling and too weak themselves is not going to happen. Or if it does happen, as you said, they're just going to get slaughtered. I don't know. I cannot imagine what they were thinking. I just honestly, Nima, I cannot imagine what they were thinking, other than they had this decision made for them and forced on them somehow. We should understand how and by whom, and that they went ahead hoping for the best. But that's a gamble. It's one thing to make a gamble on a real estate deal, and then if it goes bad, you lost some money. You can't gamble in these things because the consequences stay. They change the course of development of the world, of humanities, of alliances. How are we going to negotiate with anybody after this? Yeah. This is a tragedy for the people of the United States who voted for Trump because he promised a change in course, and then he ended up betraying them in a very dishonorable way on top of it all.
I think the chaos that is happening in the Middle East is bringing a lot of opportunity for those people who want to make this chaos even worse, which would be somehow the agenda of Netanyahu, because he doesn't like any of these countries in the Middle East. He wants all of them, poor and, disintegrated, bring suffering to all of these countries. I don't see. And here is what, Tucker Carlson reported. And it's somehow amazing to see that Iran is attacking the American bases in the Arab states, and you see the Israeli Mossad trying to do something in this state. Here is what Tucker Carlson said.
It hasn't been reported, but it's a fact that last night in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, authorities arrested Mossad agents planning on committing bombings in those countries. Now, that's weird. That doesn't make any sense. Why would the Israelis be committing bombings in two Gulf countries, which are also being attacked by Iran? Aren't they on the same side? No. Israel wants to hurt Iran and Qatar and UAE and Saudi and Bahrain and Oman and Kuwait. And they've succeeded.
Yeah.
Exactly. And not only that, but, the Israelis already said that after Iran, the next target is Turkey. And then they also said that they would go against Pakistan because, Pakistan is also a Muslim country and they have nuclear weapons. So, the fanatical theocracy, and I'm not talking about Iran, I'm talking about Israel, right? The fanatical theocracy perceives the world as a existential danger to itself. And so in their minds, they just have to burn everything to the ground to feel safe. But then, the problem is the farther they burn the world to the ground, eventually they hit the next population who is not them. And then they think, oh, I better kill them before they kill me, because they might. And so it never stops. It never stops until somebody puts an end to it and forces them to sober up and to come to the table. And I think that they've now made that an inevitable outcome, because I think they're getting defeated by Iran. And I think that there's nothing they can do. There's nothing that United States can do about that. There's nothing that NATO can do about that. And I'm already hearing voices from Israel. The former, I forget his name, former Israeli intelligence chief, who said, I'm afraid that we're moving towards a strategic defeat of Israel, meaning, you're done, you're finished, and you're surrounded by very hostile populations, hundreds of millions of them, which means that your choice will be to adopt a one-state solution to the problem of your existence, that in this one state, you're going to have to give equal rights to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, which means that the Jews will be one of the three constituent peoples of this new Israel, or, probably it's going to change name back to Palestine. And that means that a lot of people will have to leave, and only those people who have, retained their humanity and who don't see monsters in other people will be able and willing to stay. And I think that for as much pain and bloodshed this is causing at the present moment, I think it's something to look forward to, because, this region needs peace. Well, the whole world needs peace, but, the suffering of the Palestinian people, of the Yemeni people, of the Lebanese people, Syrian people, Jordanian people, even in the final analysis, you should say the Israeli people, because this whole situation has rendered them rabid and hysterical. It's like a mental illness that needs to be put to sleep. And so, unfortunately, maybe we are in one of those biblical end times periods, but end times means not that the world ends, is that a system ends. And before we close, Nima, I have to say, a lot of people who support this war against Iran, or who are on the fence, they're not sure how they feel. I find that they often hold these beliefs because somehow they perceive the Iranian regime as a very dark, medieval, repressive regime. These people don't dress like us. They look different. They talk different. So I would advise people to listen to what they say. Donald Trump, to his shame, after killing Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said that he was one of the most evil people in history. That's unforgivable. But some people, because he looks different, he's a mullah, they believe it without questioning it, without really knowing. You have the social media, you have the internet. Hear some of his speeches. Understand who he was. And then you can decide for yourself whether you think he was evil or not. But, you can contrast the words he pronounces with Trump's words, with Pete Hegseth's words, with Randy Fine's words, with Benjamin Netanyahu's words, with Ben Gvir's words. And then you can decide who's evil and who's not evil. But we need to sober up. We need to be very sharply discerning. Otherwise, without discernment, we become rabid crusaders again. And listen to the language. That language of irrational primitivism is coming back. And there's a lot of people who are applauding it. And this doesn't lead anywhere good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
My pleasure, Nima. Prayers for the people of Iran and the whole region.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. See you soon, Alex.